homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today we are making homemade yogurt in the kitchen. I always joke that I think the gateway recipes for homesteading and learning how to cook from scratch are making your own bread and making your own yogurt. They're just one of those really basic skills that can really empower you to control what's going into your food and also to save you a ton of money. And so in this video, I'm going to make 4 quarts of homemade yogurt. And I bought a gallon of local whole milk. So this is a local dairy that is near to us for, I think it was like $7.40, which seems really high for a gallon of milk. I get that, but it's a local dairy. I know the people who own it. It's fantastic milk. And from that, I made 4 quarts of beautiful yogurt. And when you do the math on that, a quart of yogurt, even on, a good price with a decent brand, is going to run you $3.50 to $4 a quart, probably easily. And so that's $16 for the price of $7 worth of milk. So really great savings and absolutely delicious. I've been making yogurt in various ways for many, many, many years. One of the things that you will always see with yogurt recipes is to heat your milk up to 180 degrees and then cool it back down again. And I used to think that was because the history of making yogurt was people were making it from raw dairy milk and they wanted to make sure it was pasteurized so that there weren't things in there growing that they didn't want growing in there. But the reality is that heating to 180 degrees actually changes the protein structure of the milk and it makes it get much, much thicker. And so you can make, what they call raw dairy yogurt where you don't heat the milk up, but it's going to be harder to get it to get thick because heating it to that 180 degrees, I think it denatures the proteins in some way. And so you get a much thicker product. You can also do things like add dried milk to your mix and that will help thicken it up as well if you want a really thick yogurt. Or you can just strain it and make Greek yogurt. And so this is going to be a series of videos where initially I just make plain whole milk yogurt. And then I'm going to make from that some Greek yogurt. So I'm going to filter it so that it thickens up and I have a beautiful Greek yogurt. And then from some of that Greek yogurt, I'm going to make a homemade frozen yogurt ice cream using my blueberries out of my garden. So 3 different videos, but what you can do with $7.40 worth of milk, some incredible, beautiful, handcrafted homemade products that would cost you, by the end, if you were to add it all up, probably close to $30. So you can do a lot with a little. In terms of incubating your yogurt, you need to culture it at about 110 degrees. And there are many, many different ways to do this. And you'll see lots of different things on the internet. You can buy special equipment that has individual 6-ounce yogurt containers and it holds it at a certain temperature so that you have individual servings. I've occasionally seen those even at thrift stores. I've never done it that way. I've always bought my yogurt plain in quart-sized containers. And so that tends to be the size that I use. And you can use your Instant Pot, which is what I'm going to show you in this recipe. But you can also just, if you have a thermometer, those little square 6-pack coolers that fit like a 6-pack of soda. If you take one of those, it easily fits 2 quarts of milk that you've put in there, and then you just fill that little cooler up with water that's 110 degrees and put the lid on. And that, because it's an insulated cooler, it will hold that 110 degree temperature or close to it. Obviously, it's going to slowly decrease over time. But if you do that overnight, you have an instant little incubator where it's going to hold that temperature and you're going to end up with a beautiful product with basically absolutely no inputs. So lots of just an insulated cooler works beautifully. I've seen people do it with a heating pad. I've never done that personally, but that also works. If you have a dehydrator, you can also use a dehydrator. So an Excalibur dehydrator, you can easily set that to 110 degrees and just use that. And I have done that a little bit. So lots of different ways to culture your yogurt to hold it at that 110 degree temperature. So don't feel like you have to go out and buy all kinds of specialized equipment. Just think about what you already have. I imagine you could just put your milk in a pot with 110 degree water and then just wrap that with some blankets so that it stayed warm longer, and that would probably also work. The longer you culture your yogurt, the thicker it gets, but also the more tangy it gets. And so if you're one of these people that is a little bit challenged by the tanginess of yogurt, and I know I was for many, many years, I didn't eat yogurt as a kid. I didn't grow up with yogurt for some reason. And it took me a long, long time to develop a taste for that tang. So when I first started eating yogurt, was not a big fan. I now am totally fine with it, but it took a lot of years. So the longer you culture it, thicker it's gonna get, but also the tangier it's gonna get. So yeah, homemade yogurt, absolutely delicious and super, super easy. And one of the most empowering things I think you can learn to do as a homesteader, or just as an urban dweller who wants a little more control over your food. Homemade yogurt, let's get started. So I have a 6-quart Instant Pot Duo, and each Instant Pot has slightly different settings for yogurt, or maybe not one at all. But on mine, I'm adding this gallon of milk. And I did learn from America's Test Kitchen that if you buy the ultra pasteurized milk, you don't actually have to heat it to 180 degrees because basically it's already been heated and cooled. You hit the yogurt button until it says boil. So there are multiple functions there. And then I'm testing just to see what my temperature is. I want it to have come up to 180. We're at 177, so close enough. And then I just let it sit on the counter until it came down to 110. I'm adding a 1/4 cup of my favorite store-bought yogurt, which is Nancy's. I'm using that as my starter culture. You don't have to buy a starter culture. You can just use whatever yogurt you already like, hopefully plain rather than sweetened. And then I'm just dissolving that into a small amount of the actual milk that's been heated and cooled, just because it's much easier to mix in if it's dispersed in a small amount and then poured into the larger amount. The oil you see here on the top, this milk is a cream on top milk, and so there's a little bit of butter fat on the top of this yogurt. Give that a good stir, make sure everything's thoroughly mixed. And then rather than actually incubate it in the Instant Pot, I'm gonna put it into quart jars that are well cleaned first, and then I'm gonna incubate it directly in the jars, because then I don't have to spoon finished yogurt into quart containers and hopefully not cross-contaminate something in the process. I'm just gonna start by incubating directly into my quart jars. And so a gallon is 4 quarts, give or take. I had a little bit of extra, but I'm spreading this out between my 4 jars. And your jars, of course, should be very clean here. I've gone so far as to boil them to thoroughly sanitize them. I think you get a longer shelf life if they're really sanitized before you start. And then if you wanted to add flavorings like vanilla or honey, you would stir it in before you poured the yogurt into your jars. A little extra going into a small half-pint container. I'm wiping my rims just for cleanliness sake. Obviously, I'm not making a shelf-stable product here, so this isn't that critical, but it's kind of habit when you're using mason jars. And then putting lids on these. They don't have to be new lids, but they should be sanitized, so make sure they're nice and clean. And then a screw top, and you could just use the removable, reusable top, so you don't have to use canning lids on this. And then that's going back into my Instant Pot. And then I'm pouring 110-degree water into this pot so that it is up around the necks. Notice I'm not covering the tops. You don't really need to cover the lid of the jar when you're doing this process. And that's true if you're doing it in a cooler as well. It turns out there's multiple settings on this Instant Pot. There's one that is a 24-hour cycle, and there's one that's an 8-hour cycle. Turns out the 24-hour cycle is a lower temperature for a different product, which I had not realized when I was setting this up. It's been a long time since I've done this. And so after letting this sit overnight, the temperature was a little low. It was about 100 instead of 110. And you can see how liquidy this is. So it hadn't quite been the temperature that it needed to be. I ended up sticking it back in at a higher temperature and letting it sit for a couple more hours. And then once it's refrigerated, you can see how thick this is. So the cream that was in that milk is at the top of our yogurt. And so just gorgeous. And then once you get underneath the cream, you have a nice creamy yogurt. You guys, super, super easy. Give it a try. It's definitely worth doing. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.